Hello and welcome to the Irish Bodybuilding Podcast. What's the crack with your host, Neil Rennie? Today, I've got Ross Byrne on. Now, Ross is one of the most established coaches in Ireland. He's part of Team Pro Coach, which to me is one of the most influential brands within prep coaching in the UK. Also, the first man to bring two bros to Ireland, which I think a lot of people were particularly happy about. The show itself I thought was fantastic, mate. But I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely, man. I'm happy to be here. Happy to, continue to try and, bring bodybuilding back home. And if this is an opportunity for me to do that, I'm going to take it with both hands.
Well, that was the thing with this podcast was really to do that. But I think, seeing you actually bringing the two bros show to Ireland, I think we're sort of in trying need for it, really. Because obviously it's kind of like there's not that many shows in Ireland. What was like, just to sort of get into it a little bit, actually, what was the main driver for you to get a show over here?
Uh, I don't want to say that I kind of parted ways with the Irish bodybuilding scene a couple of years ago, but I think it would have been, Jesus, what, 4 years ago now, the latter end of 2020, earlier stage of 2021. Cal kind of headhunted me.
Yeah.
Where I was working pretty hard in Dublin during the kind of period of COVID. I ran a seminar. I was working with him as a client at the time. And I was doing a lot of consultation at the time with Luke Hoffman, who was the other guy who led the Muscle Mentors, which is the name of the company at the time anyway, or at least was the company at the time. And kind of from that moment, I decided that the best place for me to be to kind of establish myself was going to be the UK. So alongside my partner at the time, I decided to up sticks and move that April and do my very best to kind of establish myself there. But like prior to that, like I've been coaching in some capacity for like 11 years, so it's like I was always within the Irish fitness scene to some degree. And the majority of my early influences and my early drivers came from back home. And, over the course of the last couple of years since I've been in the UK, where I've been, enveloped into the NPC, the IFBB, and like two bros within the UK, and, obviously places across Europe like Spain and stuff like that, like the disparity of availability for people back home to even just as simply as get in front of NPC judges
Yeah.
just wasn't really there. Like obviously we had the muscle contest, and I'm not going to say too much on the muscle contest in terms of like, kind of like anything negative. It's only ever been a positive experience whenever I've gone there. But when you only have a single pro qualifier across the year, I think the ability for people to actually garner the experience of what the NPC is, I think is quite limited, because at the end of the day, the NPC IFBB, that is the only true path to legitimate professional bodybuilding. And for me as a professional, like the majority of the athletes who I work with and I want to work with are people who are either in that professional rank already or people who want to go pro.
Yeah.
At the same time, I've never wanted to remove myself from the place where I came from, that kind of way, and the place where I kind of established myself, and the place where, any kind of passion and any kind of drive that I have now was established. It all happened back home. Like I didn't just learn that I love bodybuilding. I learned the process of coaching, and I love it as much as I do. That didn't happen when I moved to the UK. Like that was something that I loved and I was passionate about for a long, long, long time before I moved to the UK. So the longer I spent within the UK scene, the more I built relationships with people like Ian Constable, who is the current kind of head honcho within Two Bros and kind of representative of the NPC here. And I'd been toying and messing with him and, kind of swinging jokes his way about bringing Two Bros to Ireland and, trying to figure out a way to do it kind of somewhat jovially for like kind of like a year or two. But then at the latter end of last year, the middle part of last year, I approached him with the idea and he actually agreed to it. And then that kind of got the wheels turning, because I think for them, I don't carry enough of an ego to consider myself, at the forefront of Irish bodybuilding coaching. I know people have said that. I don't look at myself any different to any other coach in Ireland, no matter what level you're at. And, that's the God's honest truth. I look at myself as the same as I did when I started 11 years ago. I've just been doing it for longer. So I think that once he knew that somebody, I guess, who people know, and once he knew there was somebody who understood the bodybuilding landscape over there was going to be able to be involved, I think that kind of gave him the insight that he needed to be able to say, okay, this is going to be a return. Because at the end of the day, bodybuilding is orientated around a business, and there has to be a certain level of like either notoriety and then of course profitability, within the actual process, so to speak. So like, that kind of brought about the decision to do it. And then, the seed was kind of planted from there, really.
What were the challenges involved? Like, were there anything specific with being north and south and, the whole country that we have here?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I got a lot of messages around, like, because obviously it's in Lisbon, and everyone who's probably watching this is aware of the kind of geopolitical landscape
Yeah,
between the north and the south. And the other issue that we had was basically the NPC territory. So essentially, Two Bros doesn't have territory over the southern part of the country, but
right.
it does have territory over the UK.
Mhm.
And geographically, the north of Ireland is part of the UK. So the ability to put the show on there was feasible, you
Yeah,
know. And the way I look at it now, like, I'm not going to sit here and talk about my political views in any sense of the word, because that's not what bodybuilding's about. I don't actually think that, political views, especially in Ireland, belong in the bodybuilding scene.
right.
I did get a handful of messages from people. I did hear of a handful of phone calls that were given around even the name of the show and the color scheme. And, like, I really, really did my best to appease, what I was actually trying to do, which was bring bodybuilding back to the island of Ireland.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to find some kind of navigationary prospect of trying to, create this kind of Republican show in the fucking middle of Lisbon. Like, that was not my intention at all.
yeah,
And a lot of the organizational capacity in the background isn't even actually done by me. I think a lot of people think that I gained from a financial perspective from the show. I don't earn a penny from that show, like not a single penny. The way that it works is that I facilitate the cost of running the show. That's it.
yeah,
There's no financial return. I don't have. It's not like an investment. It is. I don't know what you want to call it. I guess, like, you sponsor the NPC to hold the show, and
yeah,
that's as far as it goes. So, like, for me, it wasn't about some kind of return. It was all about doing everything I possibly could within the means that I had the ability to bring the NPC to Ireland. And
yeah,
that is the entirety of the country. That is or not the entirety of the island. Because again, I know some people here are going to have their own geopolitical views, and other people are going to have the opposite. But that's left at the door at a bodybuilding show. The kind of way, like, you don't, like, that doesn't have a place. But obviously, because the guys who are running the show, i.e., Two Bros, they're, I don't want to say their ignorance to it, but their lack of awareness around the whole thing did present them with a little bit of hesitation around the organization of it. And I told them, I was like, politics will be left at the door,
yeah.
and to do what needs to be done in order to bring a great show to the island. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think, and that's the thing, like with bodybuilding, like there isn't, you want to see no politics in it. It shouldn't be skin color, religion. And I actually think you've done a very good job. I think the majority of people, especially when they've seen the show as well and how it was put on, like it was obviously, I think as the show grows as well, there'll be more support it, depending even in times of the show as well. I'm sure something that we'd said about as well. I think you'd mentioned it, maybe trying to move the actual date of the show as
yeah.
well, potentially next year.
Trying to move it as much as I possibly can around the Irish bodybuilding calendar. But even with that, right, like, I get that the majority of the shows in Ireland are, there's NABA, there's PCA, there's the muscle contest. I don't really give a fuck about those federations. Honestly, that's the reality of it. And the reason I don't is because I want people to have access to the best bodybuilding league in the world,
Yeah.
which is the NPC and the IFBB. And anyone who argues that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You are wrong. I've been involved with the NPC and the IFBB now for 4 years, and I've seen what the caliber is like, and I've seen what the direction of these athletes is, and the dedication of these athletes, and the places that these shows and these federations can take people. And you can slate the NPC based off information that you don't actually know for shows that you weren't actually at, in a way to, big up the other federations, which are fabulous, and give athletes an unbelievable opportunity to get on stage, have that experience, go through that process. But if your goal is to be a professional athlete, or if your goal is to be a high level bodybuilder, there's only one place where you can do that. And that was my goal, and that will remain my goal when it comes to trying to bring bodybuilding back home.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I see you mentioned that even in your story last night. That is like, I think no matter what people say, I think that is legitimate. Like that is NPC is
it's a
what
fact. It's a fact.
you mean by maybe not having NPC shows or more chances to, I suppose, be among that level in Ireland. Has it, in your opinion, hampered potentially the level of athlete in the country?
I don't think it's hampered the level at all, because the bodybuilding level has always been good in Ireland. There's
Mhm.
all fabulous bodybuilders in Ireland. Like, even back in the day when I was a little bit more involved in the day to day of going to shows back home when I lived there, like, there was fabulous athletes there. But the issue becomes is that the ceiling of what is good and what is great is a lot lower back home. And it becomes oftentimes a big fish, small pond mentality.
Yeah,
And I remember really, really favoring and speaking highly of, and I still speak highly of, the athletes who I used to see back home. But then you go to a regional, And you realize that a lot of the guys back home wouldn't even make first call out. Because the depth by which they're willing to go to is ceilinged by the level by which they have to get to.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very, very low. And I want bodybuilding to be what it is here in Ireland.
Yeah.
And people just don't have the perception of it, or even the accessibility of it. 95% of individuals who are bodybuilders, no matter what part of the country that you lived in for that Emerald Classic, could drive no more than 2 or 3 hours to be at the show. That is something that, from an NPC perspective, isn't really available to them. Obviously, you have the muscle contest, which is under the NPC, and it's a pro qualifier, but it's not a regional.
Yeah.
And I actually do believe that eventually we'll have more pro qualifiers, but that's going to be a more broad and a far more kind of like crossing T's and dotting I's process, because there's paperwork that's orientated around that. And it's honestly paperwork that, one, I'm not involved in right now, and two, I don't fully understand.
Yeah.
The kind of way. So I can't actually tell people exactly what's going to happen. What I can tell you is that will not be the only Emerald Classic that you'll see. And one of the goals that I have over the course of the next couple of years is to try and find some either kind of collaborative effort, or speak to the right people, whoever that may be, which again, I'm not 100% sure who those people are yet, to bring the NPC to the south part of the country.
Yeah.
And bring it at a level where it's similar to the UK. Obviously, you're not going to have that high a volume of shows because you don't have that high volume of an athlete. But like, people need, if they want to fully take bodybuilding as far as they want, or they deem that they feel that they want to back home, you need to be competing at the level whereby it's at its highest. And that's really what I wanted to do. And and then the other side of it is like I said, I appreciate the time that I spent back home so much, and I'm a very proud Irishman. I'm a very, very proud Irishman, and I've always been, somebody who wears his Irishness on his chest, that kind of way, and it's part of my identity, and it's part of my story massively, and I want to be able to orientate that into, kind of using my time in the UK as the foundations for my ability. And I guess, again, I don't like using words that make me sound like I'm more than I am. So again, forgive me if this makes you sound like a prick. A notoriety level to take that.
I think that's fair, because obviously, you earn the right to climb up the ranks within coaching or bodybuilding. So I think it's fair enough to speak in yourself in that terms if you've got evidence behind it. And I think what came across very well to me as well, Ross, was even in your speech at the show itself, it was quite clear how much that meant to you. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think anyone's thinking, oh, I guess it's for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I mean, man, that show meant more to me than I can possibly even put into words. And I'm somebody who likes to speak, and has relatively as nervous as I do get in those moments, and as maybe as clear as words may sound, at least to people who are from where I'm from and don't have to kind of break through the accent too much. I had a really heavy year in the lead up to that. I had the end of a very long relationship. For all case in points, I had a pretty difficult financial situation creep up, and then my best friend in the world, who was also my dad, he died. He died of a pretty aggressive cancer. And he's where the name Byrne comes from. Like, his name was Noel Byrne. And I'd love for him to have seen that. And I think that the show really, for me personally, acted as that was the page turning, where it's like, okay, now you can start kind of rebuilding things again. And also, I think I spoke about this on the Pro Coach podcast last night, where I think as professionals in any capacity, as athletes in any capacity, we're all looking for a little bit of a head nod, where you're getting some kind of confirmation that you're doing the right thing. Yeah. That you're in the right line of work, and that the work that you've been doing up until a certain point has been worth something. And like you've already probably seen, I struggle to speak of myself too highly, because I try to maintain my feet on the ground. But I couldn't deny how much of a head nod that felt like. I really couldn't deny how much of a head nod that felt like. And I did my best to be in it, in the crowd, speaking to everyone, thanking everyone for being there. And it wasn't for some kind of like facade or some kind of act, because again, this is something that doesn't return anything financially for me. I just genuinely appreciated the people who came there. I'm pretty sure that was the most amount of spectator tickets the Two Bros have ever sold for a regional. There was like 200 odd people there, and everyone was nuts. Nuts. Because people with banners, people were chanting, and that fed into the athletes. And I was backstage for the majority of the day, making sure everyone was okay. Not a single person was having a bad time. at a bodybuilding show where stress is that high, not a single person having a bad time is one of the best things I can possibly take away. And then obviously JP, the head judge, stopping the show and literally saying that this is the best bodybuilding show he's ever been to. Like that was very, very special.
No, even from the stage itself to the backstage, like there's loads of room. I thought the tanning tent being right beside the actual backstage, I think that makes a big difference rather than having to walk around outside to fucking get to your tan. I think it all came together very well, mate. And I think you should be proud of yourself. I think especially being so open about what the year you went through was. I think it should be.
I think the one thing I learned, man, when you lost my dad and things went west, is that life is too short not to be honest with people. Way. There's not to take the tone down or take the positive vibes down. There's so much things I wish I said to my dad, and there's so much that I wish he understood about the work that I do, the kind of way. And, from there, mate, I've learned that a lot of problems that we have aren't real problems. And that life is way too short not to be honest with people, and if anyone can take anything away from conversations with me or listening to this podcast, it's like whatever pedestal people may put me on, it's a picture of me on that pedestal, the kind of way as it is with everyone else. I'm not really standing on anything. My feet are on the ground just like you are. And I will continue to try to, no matter what level it is that I want to get to, which is a very high level, where I want to go to in coaching is very, very high. I'm always going to do my best to, one, remember where I come from, and then two, just keep my feet on the ground. Because I really don't believe that I'm any better or any different to anyone else that's coaching or anything else. I truly don't. I've just put the head down for the longest time within the best capacity that I have the ability to. And I've been also very, very lucky. I was very, very lucky. And obviously I worked for everything that I've gotten. Yeah. But I was very lucky that Callum said, this guy has something, because I didn't see it. I was going through one of the worst times of my life at that point. I lost all my money to COVID. I was very, very ill for like 6 to 9 months prior to that. And I put that seminar on. I had to cancel it and reschedule it because of COVID 4 or 5 times. The original date was May. It didn't end up happening until September. So like all of these things kind of like shifted together and, kind of put me to a position where I was given the springboard, so to speak, and then it was, the choice whether to work for it or not. And I'd like to think that I was able to work for it from there.
Well, I mean, obviously, you have to put the work in to get where you are. And like, say, coaches like me that are aspiring and looking to come up in the prep coaching sort of industry as well, I think it's important to hear that sort of thing, but it's also interesting to hear like how you did go from, because obviously COVID was a bad time for fucking anybody in the fitness industry, in terms of, I was an on-floor gym PT, gone, right, had to get into online coaching. But for yourself, like from that point when you started working with Cal, like how did that come about, and where's it what opportunities has it offered you in the last couple of years?
So I owe, and no, Cal never lets me ever do this, really. I owe an unbelievable debt of gratitude to Callum. An unbelievable debt of gratitude. I always knew I had something, but like I said, you need evidence, you need, support. And the way I've always referred to it is like, you need a bit of a leg up. So I'd been, again, I don't know to what level other people did this, but like for me, I realized, so originally I wanted to be an English teacher, right? A history teacher. Yeah, originally I wanted to be an English and history teacher. And I think, are they called the A levels up north?
I believe so. It's been a while.
Yeah, so obviously down south it's called the Leaving Cert. Yeah. So I was kind of gun ho around that. I was a pretty depressed young fella at the time, if I'm honest with you. And then a girl that I was seeing who, like, when you're 18, it's not a real partner, but it was a friend who, you have a romantic connection with for the most part. She actually killed herself a couple of weeks beforehand by Leaving Cert. And that just fucked me. Absolutely fucked me. And, life wasn't worth shit kind of thing. It was all that kind of stuff. Obviously, I look back on it now and it's a little bit different and I have some level of regret. But, then not too long after that, I got the fucking piss kicked out of me. And it ripped all the ligaments in my hand. So by the time it actually came to do the Leaving Cert, I was full of meds. I was fucking smoking weed to beat the band. And I didn't really give too much of a rat's about my exams at that stage. I had to have a writer do everything for me in a private room for the whole 2 weeks. At that stage, I just kind of like, fuck this. So my guidance counselor at the time was like, why don't you go and do personal training? Because prior to doing personal training and prior to getting into bodybuilding, I trained at quite a high level of martial arts. I trained as a pretty high level martial artist for about 12 years. And it was kind of through that, as I got older, I kind of started to, train in the gym as a kind of compliment towards that. I was training with the Onakai squad, who were kind of the eventual guys who would have represented the Olympics. That was kind of where my head was at, is that I stay with them, and eventually I would have kind of made the Olympic team. But once I got into personal training, which was advised to me by my guidance counselor just to tie me over for the year, I was there probably about 2 weeks. I was like, no, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is exactly what I want to do. And then I actually got kicked out of my course. Because for me, I went all in on it. I went all in. I became hyper focused on it, and I learned, and I really, really enveloped myself in it as much as I could. And asking too many questions and failing a soccer coaching course was the excuse that they gave me to kick me out of it.
Out of that.
That was what it was, man. Yeah, but at the time, obviously, I was like, this is what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to teach people, but I actually just wanted to help people. Mm. That's actually what I wanted to do. Now, at this point in time, bodybuilding wasn't really in my periphery. I'd been coaching martial arts at that stage as well. Like, I'd been coaching a lot of kids and coaching some adults as well, and kind of the strength and conditioning side of things. And eventually I would maintain my fitness instructor's course and get a job in a private gym. And then from there, I actually originally started studying all the Poliquin stuff. Anyone who's been doing this long enough will know who Charles Poliquin was. I used to say that Charles Poliquin, and being around Charles Poliquin is showing my age, but I'm actually not that old a guy. I just started very, very young when I was coaching. I'm glad I started young, and I learned from the right people. And then eventually from there, I decided to go out on my own after a couple of years and do personal training in like a big box gym, like a FlyFit. I think you guys call it Pure Gym. Yeah. I spent some time there, struggled with actual client acquisition, but I was good at the personable side of things. And it was from there I started to train a little bit more for myself. And, at that point in time, the politics of the martial arts led me and my sister to both decide to go. My little sister was going to be a fucking phenom. She was going to be far better than I ever was. We were both very, very talented, but she was going to be an absolute phenom. But anyway, that's in the past, and I don't regret that at all either. Eventually, I would start training in Southside Gym, and I became obsessed with a man by the name of Larry Doyle. People probably might know who Larry Doyle was. Larry Doyle was like one of the OG bodybuilders back in the day, and became one of my closest friends and my first mentor. And there was so many times during that period where I was really struggling with the financial side of things, because I wasn't like balling. I don't think I've really ever been balling, so to speak. I really don't. But he kept me on the straight and narrow for quite a long time, and it would just kind of continue to merge from there. I was still very, very obsessed, and maybe even overly obsessed with the education side of things, and just trying to do my best, because I knew I didn't have the opportunity to go and study these things. I didn't have the money I don't come from any money. That my family didn't come from money. I come from a council estate. I come from, just like a mountain town. So I was like, well, I have to do it myself. So that kind of led me to just continue to try and learn and do my best to retain information. And I struggled with that in the first place because I got pretty bad ADHD, but at the same time, I just continued to just bully through it. And COVID came and years would go by. And it was in that kind of COVID period where I was getting the COVID pay when I started working with Cal. I used my COVID money to pay for Cal. And I was doing consultations and I'd use 1 week to pay Cal and then 1 week to pay Luke Hoffman for consultations. And that was a pretty recurring theme for me the entirety of the way through my career, is that any money I did have, I spent on education. And again, I don't regret any of that. I don't regret it one bit. I was very, very lucky that I'd done a lot of the earlier stage educational developments before they were like mega popular. So I was always given access. They were always a little bit cheaper than they are now. And then obviously prior to COVID, where like seminars were so popular, I was flying back and forth to Birmingham all the time to do muscle mentor seminars. I was doing consultations with pretty much anyone I could get in contact with. Dean St. Martin, I used to do consultations with him before anyone gave a fuck about who I was. And to be honest, before anyone really gave a fuck who Dean was. And that was kind of like a recurring theme that continued to go on. And I eventually joined the Muscle Mentors portal when they launched that. And I think it was at that point in time where Luke and Cal started to keep a bit more of an eye on me, because I was able to answer questions, and I didn't think anything of it because I thought that everyone on this is smart. I never considered myself any better than anyone else. I've tried to maintain that ideal the whole way through. And then I decided to run a seminar off the back of being pretty ill. I went to Thailand. I was pretty sick when I got there. Didn't realize. Got very sick when I arrived. Got medically treated over there, came back, but I had no clients, no money, no nothing. And I actually went down to Barry in Southside Gym in Sandyford. to tell him that I wasn't going to be able to work there anymore because I can't afford the rent. And he's another person I owe a great debt of gratitude to, because he was like, don't worry about the rent, get out there and train people. You let me know when you're ready to start paying me rent again. And he also said, you need to do something with the information that's in your head, so to hold a seminar. So I decided to hold a seminar, which I spoke about. I called it Muscle for the Masses, and it turned out to be one of the most important weekends of my whole life. I charged 50 quid for the entire weekend per person, but people came from all over the country. Like, people drove, despite COVID, they drove down. I had to cancel it, I had to reschedule it, I had to cancel it, I had to reschedule it. And the day it was due to be on, I think it was September 13th, 2020, would it have been? Maybe 2021. I remember I was getting everything organized, had the whole place set up downstairs in the gym, and then boom, news bulletin, no indoor events the night before the show. I remember at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up straight into the back of the shed, picked up a marquee, went down, found another marquee, moved everything outside onto the AstroTurf, moved everything, went, they had to set the whole thing up outside, extension leads, the whole thing. I think I stopped setting it up at 6:30 in the morning, and the seminar started at 8 a.m. And I was just straight on the door, straight onto the floor. And that was my first teaching experience, and I had a bit of a flair for it. I fucking loved it, because I spent months designing these things, designing them and managing them and learning them and paying for the information and trying to learn the information at the same time. And then a week later, Cal asked me to do a check-in. My check-ins were always on a Saturday, a call on a Saturday morning. And he said, can we do our check-in at 6 p.m. on Wednesday? And I was like, yeah, no stress. So I remember going back home and driving up the car, and my girlfriend at the time, she leaned over to her. She goes, imagine they gave you a job, right? This is no word of a lie. This is the God's honest truth. She goes, imagine they gave you a job. I laughed in her face, and then I got pissed off. Like, don't say shit like that. I was like, that is ridiculous. I was like, it's a check-in. He's busy on the weekend. I was busy on the weekend. He just wants to catch up. I was like, you're absolutely mental. Maybe a couple of years' time, I'll ask about it, but like right now, it's just not the time. And I was very upset about it. I was like sitting there and not really understanding why anyone would say that. 2 hours later, I jumped on a call. The whole team was there. They offered me a job. And to this day, it is the most emotional I've ever felt in my entire life. Outside of my dad dying. I remember I was sitting there with Turtle Beach headphones that I bought secondhand off somebody, right? And the whole fucking thing, the big blue Turtle Beach, and I was trying to kind of maintain like a little level of composure. And this is no word of a lie as well. So it was Luke and Callum who were the heads, and I think James was there as well at the time. Again, I might be wrong about that. And they were like speaking to me about it, how the seminar go, because that's what I assumed it was. Luke was there because he was doing consultations with me, so he's like, he just wanted to know how I got on, and he was just jumping on for that reason. And they're like, well, we were just having considerations about expanding the team. And in my head, I was like, they're going to ask me if I know anyone. I swear, because it's the whole idea of it is just so far fetched to me at this point in time. And I was sitting there, and they were like, we wanted to know if, and I'm sitting there expecting saying like, do I know anyone in the UK who I've worked with? They're like, do I know if you want to join? And I remember, right, I was sitting there on my hands and my laps, and I just started shaking. Like I've busted my balls for years, and I made very little money. I made enough to live, but I was living at home with my parents. I never had much, the kind of way. Like, I wasn't going out buying clothes and buying holidays, and that wasn't me. I just didn't have the ability to do it. Again, anything I did have was forwarded towards education. And I remember I took the headphones off. I was sitting there like that, shaking, and I cried. And I cried in front of them
on the camera.
I fucking bawled my eyes out. Bawled my eyes out, because I knew what that meant, and I knew that it was the thing that I'd worked towards. I didn't know it was going to be the thing that I'd worked towards, but I knew it was that initial, like, here's the thing that you're going to be able to work off and go from. And then that was it, man. A couple of months later, I moved to the UK, like I said. And that's when like my interest in legitimate bodybuilding kind of really picked up. I'd already been kind of orientated around this idea of becoming a bodybuilder and bodybuilding myself. I'd already competed before once, but the more I spent time around Callum specifically, the more, and I was a fan of CR Physique, and anyone who's watching this who knows Callum was actually CR Physique on Instagram years ago. Like he was the man. He was banding a hack squat. He had cuffs on his hands. He was big. He had things that he could say that were smart. He had a cool dog. Like he knew who Oscar Young was. Like this is the place where I was. I was a fanboy, like an absolute fanboy. So when all of this kind of came to head, I remember obviously even Cal was a bit teary. Luke was even crying on the phone. I remember it because like I couldn't express to them how much that meant to me. you know, and how much I was going to grab onto the opportunity with both hands, you know, that kind of way. And I remember you hung up the call. I ran in like a 7-year-old boy and jumped into my ma's lap. I jumped into my ma's lap. I was like, "Ma, I've got this fuck, Ma, you'll never guess what happened." And at the time, like, you know, if you ask my dad at the time, rest his soul, like, what does your son do? He was like, he's a weightlifter. You know, you know that was about as far as it went. My mom understood it a lot more, so she was unbelievably happy. And then I rang my partner at the time, and I was like, "They've given me a job," and she hung up the phone at me. Right? She goes, "How fucking dare you fuck with me like that?" Right? I swear to God, she thought I was joking. She thought it was
That's
a
what you
joke.
thought out where previously.
I was like, oh, I was like, they've given me a fucking job. Like, they want me to work with them. And then that was it. A couple of months later, I moved to Manchester, and then that was how it happened, man.
And did your client base change like overnight in terms of the type of client, or like I suppose the level of client that you were taking?
No, man, because the thing is, right, like in Ireland, nobody really gave a fuck about me because I was the young gun who was saying things that the old school heads didn't like.
Yes.
You know, and to this day, the old school heads don't like me.
No.
To this day, and you know, I don't really care. You know, I really don't. I don't really care. I don't care what people of the past think of me when, you know, they're not delivering the results that they probably should be, and that's another conversation for another day. But alongside that, you know, I had to then from there land into a new country onto a massive platform and prove that I was worth working with. So the majority of my clients in the earlier stages were lifestyles, were photo shoots, the occasional competitor here and there. And, you know, slowly but surely, I started to, you know, get good photo shoot results. And I started to build a certain level of kind of capacity around lifestyle and getting those in really, really good shape. And I'd been studying a lot of female physiology at the time. A lot of my interests were peaking around kind of female physiology and human physiology as a whole. So I got to a point where competitors, female competitors who previously competed, who were dealing with things like hypothalamic amenorrhea, would come and speak to me. And then they would be like, "Oh, you helped me with this. Why don't you prep me?"
Yeah.
And then I started prepping quite a handful of bikini athletes, and then I get the occasional male athlete. And then from there, once I kind of put on a rookie season, which was 2 or 3 years ago, like I didn't place anyone out of the top 2 for the whole year. You know, everyone just placed, done well, everyone looked good. And I think that kind of gave me that initial like, oh, he's okay at this, you know. And then that continued to just roll from there. You know, I was the Muscle Mentors was where I was kind of established for the first kind of 2 years, and then the Muscle Mentors then kind of evaporated into, you know, what Pro Coach is now. The company split up into a couple of different pieces. Eventually, Muscle Mentors ceased to be. Paul Standell, who was working with us at the time, James Sutton, who was working with us at the time, they went and started the PT project, which is now their own very, very successful version of what the Muscle Mentors education portal probably should have been. And then me and Callum, and then eventually Ryan and Alex went on to start Pro Coach. Yeah. Cal is the figurehead, myself and Cal as the lead prep coaches, and then eventually we would pick up the team that we have now. And you know, over the course of that period of time, I picked up a good few clients. I was picking up pretty decent results still within the bikini division. And I'd say probably the biggest thing that allowed me to become, I guess, looked at as an actual bodybuilding coach was actually Yemi.
Yeah.
Was actually Yemi. I turned Yemi pro at the Arnold, which is the biggest amateur show in Europe, arguably in the world, outside of the Olympias and outside of the Arnolds in the US. And that put a lot of people who maybe didn't necessarily, and this is a lot of the coaches who I looked up to the time, Tom Hames, Zach Fotheringham, like, you know, all like Martin Winston, all these guys who are now like my friends, Jace, and you know, these are guys are proper good boys to me now. That gave me the head nod from them, like this guy knows what he's doing. You know, and then from there, then once I had this, you know, genetic phenom, which is what Yemi is, more and more people became orientated around what I could do. And he presented me with the opportunity to show better athletes what I can do for them. You know, I would like to say that I always had that ability, but I just didn't have the pool of individuals in front of me to be able to realize that.
I think that's so interesting as well, because I was talking about, I've gone to the course that Martin Winston and Tom and Cal put on, and Martin said a lot about, like, you know, for so many years as well, it was like taking ones to like UKUP, PCA, even though he knew he had the ability to take more, it took that one golden goose, as he called it, and being mixed breed to then go fucking cool.
Yemi was my golden goose. Josh Bridgman was Cal's golden goose. You know, everyone has had their athlete that's given them the kind of the spread of awareness, you know. And then once Callum started getting results with Josh, all his other results started to shine through. And I remember that during that period of time, Cal was just knocking out after overall after overall after overall, card after card after card, and Cal built himself up over a similar timeline as I did, and I'll still to this day always look up to Callum Raystrick, that kind of way. And it took me a long time to change my attitude. So I used to tell people I'm going to be the next Callum Raystrick, but it took me a long time to realize that I actually want to be the first Ross Byrne. And that took me a long time to realize that I want to aspire to be like Callum, and I feel as though slowly but surely I'm getting to that point, because Callum, as much as he's one of my best friends, and he really is one of my best friends, me and Callum are very, very close. He is to this day my hero, and I have no problem saying that. We all need an avatar, we all need a role model, we all need somebody. And I always say Callum is the big burly English big brother I never asked for, but I'm glad that I have. Because beyond bodybuilding, he's been an incredible friend to me. An incredible friend to me, particularly over the last year and a half, where, my life took a very quick and significant downturn. And that's not to put my shitty situation on a pedestal, because, I was lucky to have the people around me that I did. I know other people aren't as lucky as I am, and I hope that anyone listening to this who's going through a hard time is dealing with it as best as they can. But, I have a real family in pro coaching, a legitimate family. And for me, I can't do this, and this might be some advice that people might take on well. Like, I can't do this as simply a profession. I literally love some of the people who I coach.
Yeah.
I love them as brothers, as sisters, as, the people who literally put bread on my table.
Yeah.
And I think more and more coaches need to understand the value of the athletes that they have, no matter what level they're at. Like, the reason that you can pay your rent is your athletes.
Yeah.
The reason that you can eat your food is your athletes. And I don't believe in the idea of not becoming friends with your athletes. I don't believe that at all. Obviously, in some situations, like, that needs to be a gradual rapport building period, like, where you eventually become friends with them. But I don't believe in having that professional segregation all the time. I know for a fact,
very challenging when you are integrally part of somebody's life as well, especially when you're doing the prep side of things, where it's not just a physical kind of thing. There's a massive emotional support with it. Your investment in them is their investment in you.
You're a friend, you're a coach, you're a counselor, you're an ear, sometimes you're a shoulder, and that comes with the job. Like, that comes with the territory, that kind of way. And some people can manage client acquisition and, results and, building a portfolio of results without that. But 9 times out of 10, you hear they're a shitty person.
Yeah.
The only thing I don't mind if somebody leaves because I didn't get them a result. I don't mind if somebody leaves because they think I'm too much of whatever or too little of whatever. The only thing that I will ever be upset about is if somebody doesn't receive me as a caring individual when it comes to coaching them.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I really care about, is the fact that the individual knows that I actually give a fuck. Yeah. And I then layer that personal aspect of me, which is something that was geared into my mother for the most part. My mother is a saint. Like, she's an incredible woman. And, she has always been somebody who has put love first and care first and put herself first. I put other people first. And I've, battled with that kind of morality an awful lot, because, for me, I would consider myself somebody who can't really do the job that I do, or even just do the things that I do day to day, solely for myself. It's not that I don't care about myself that much. It's just like my ability to, I guess, find fulfillment in my life is predicated on the sanctity, happiness, and appreciation of people around me, rather than my own.
Do you find it hard to separate? Is there a separation between, like, say, whatever normal life is and coaching, or is it very much like this coaching?
There is now.
Yeah.
There is now, because I've had to. So, like, obviously there's only so much separation I can make with certain athletes because of my friends. There's only so much I can do. But I think that there is a period of time where every coach needs to envelop themselves. We're almost 365, 24/7. You're a bodybuilding coach, and you work mental hours, and you'll do 16, 20-hour days. I've done it many times, and sometimes I still do. And you do have to go through that and you'll hit burnout, and like burnout isn't a sign that you're doing something bad. It's not necessarily a sign that you're doing something good, but it's a sign that you're giving some effort into what you're doing.
The effort involved in it, yeah, exactly.
It's true, man. Like, so there is a separation now. I think previously I was in a relationship for 8 years with a girl who was also involved in the fitness industry, and again, I don't regret any part of that relationship either. But I think because my lifestyle as a coach and my relationship was wrapped into kind of the same thing, it was a constant umbrella of bodybuilding all the time. And I'll never fully be able to remove the umbrella of bodybuilding because I love it so much. And like bodybuilding does in certain aspects rule my life, like it does, because it builds my life. Bodybuilding in one way or another is the reason I have everything I have. It's the reason I have this nice apartment. It's the reason I have my beautiful dog, who's also my best friend in the world. So like I can't remove it, and it will be wrong for me to remove it. But I think that for me, a lot of the reasons as well as to why I wasn't able to remove my work and bodybuilding from, every single day was because I actually lacked organization. And that's true, even true to this day. I've got pretty bad ADHD. So I struggle with managing tasks. I do struggle with managing my time. I was 20 minutes late for this podcast. So like, it's like, I've always had limitations there, but I think just learning how to manage that a little bit better for myself over the last year or so has been huge for me to be able to learn how to take a step back. And then also just taking the pressure off myself over what the high delivery of service actually is. That was something as well that I had to learn. Like I'm now in a very, very fruitful relationship with a new girl who I love very, very much, who has absolutely no links to bodybuilding. So when I spend time with her and when I take that step back from work, I'm able to just fully envelop myself. This girl also has no social media whatsoever. So that also helps. Never has, I never will. And that complements me in my ability to take separation in my work and take separation from my professional life very, very well, because I can kind of use these periods of time as the predicator and the motivator for my work during the week. I'm also very lucky that like I've been doing the same working process for so long now that I don't really need to think about it too much beyond just timings of everything. That kind of way that like I can deliver a check-in very effectively. I can program very effectively. My actual client numbers might surprise individuals because they're not actually all that high. Client acquisition will continue to be the most difficult thing you'll ever do as a bodybuilding coach. And there's, I guess, parts of my career development that have actually bottlenecked me in certain aspects, because I was both lucky and I guess you could say in other aspects unlucky to build a pool of really talented athletes. And it got to a point where there's an idea that people think I only coach pros.
Yeah.
And people think that I only coach high level athletes, when that's not the case whatsoever. My only barrier to entry when it comes to a client is the ability to work hard.
Yeah.
That's honestly my only that's my only barrier to entry. And of course a monthly fee. But like
that's also, would you find that you get people still even at the point where you're at now, whereas like they don't have a decent level of adherence?
Oh yeah, bro. Dude, this is something for you. This is something for anyone watching this who maybe has ever had issues with adherence to a diet or managing their life outside of bodybuilding while prepping. Whether it's clients of mine in the past or whether it's clients who I know of within the team or clients who I know of within other coaches, pro athletes are some of the most unadherent individuals you will ever meet in your entire life.
Okay, talk us through it. That was one of the questions actually.
I'm not gonna throw any names out there.
No, I'm not asking.
The limitations on adherence, the limitations on one's capacity to do what's necessary for a prep, right, are the same at every level, right? And I have known pros, and I don't throw any shade at these people. I don't, because I have I'll go through all this as well when we can. I've got all the time in the world, mate. So you don't feel limited on anything. Like the amount of times that I have seen high level pros that the names of which you will know across both Irish circuits, UK circuits, and European circuits, who binge regularly, right, who have the same limitations as you do, at every level, and, it happens all the time, and it happens constantly. You'll always hear about it, where they're limited on their ability to maintain the adherence that is necessary, because whether you have a pro card in your hand or whether you're trying to go for one or whether you're just trying to do a PCA regional or an NPC regional, There's one overlying factor that affects every single individual. It's that bodybuilding is fucking difficult. It's really, 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 really hard. It's really, really hard. And when other elements of your life seep in, that's when things can be a problem. And that happens at every level, every single level. I will, at least now, I don't look at somebody with a card or IFBB Pro and their Instagram handle and think this is going to be an easy process for me to coach them. I don't have the risk of this person binging. I don't have the risk of this person going off plan. Because the reality is that the risk is always there, and it's oftentimes the exact same. You also meet new issues when it comes to coaching higher level athletes, especially if they've been experienced, where they have these ideals around what they've done before and how effective they've been, and they tell you what's going to work, even though they're paying you to tell them what's going to work. You know, there are other things that you kind of run into. But I don't think that anyone watching this or listening to this should ever like place them on a pedestal of respect, of notoriety, and of the things you want to achieve. But don't believe that these are individuals who are absolutely and unequivocally, I guess, kind of armored in their ability to not have weaknesses on prep or not have weaknesses in the off season, because every single person does. And that idea over the last couple of years at every level has kind of built upon my kind of overarching ideology of what I think people need to do when it comes to prepping for a show. And that's to take ownership of the things that can go wrong and don't ignore them. Like, if you have issues with food, if you have issues with, purging, if you have issues with your body confidence and self-image, a prep is not the fucking answer.
Yeah.
It's not the answer. The prep can be an incredible thing for you to do, and it can be something that can take you to a new level within your own competitive aspirations. But until you box off the actual issue that's leading you to deal with those problems, you're most likely going to run into them. And if you don't run into them into a prep, you're going to exacerbate them when you're finished. People need to address the things that they are dealing with from a mental perspective.
And will you examine this, Ross, as you go, like, in with, say you're starting with a client, are those aspects that you'll maybe examine and try and look into a little bit?
100%. I make sure that whatever they are willing to tell me, they'll tell me.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say, no, I don't have those problems, and they actually do. A lot of the time, they're not necessarily lying to me when they say that they don't. They just don't understand that they do, and then they kind of come around later on. Particularly with females, I do it not because I think the females are more likely to binge and have problems, but I just think that, and again, people can scold me whatever way they want to, I just think the females as a whole are a little bit more delicate. And I also think that the risks imposed to females when competition preps go wrong or are taken to too much of an assertive place, the physiological kickback that can come off the back of that is arguably significantly more impactful on them than it is on men. Because you can't just lob TRT in a woman straight away. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't just, and like when a man binges post show and then suddenly they're just fucking full of shit with a little bit less abs, they're going to be happy. Yeah. When a woman can't necessarily control that and they're already, only 50 odd kilos soaking wet, and then they see that massive deviation in the way that they look, or what's more likely, they perceive a massive deviation in the way that they look, that can oftentimes be a lot more damaging. Yeah. So, like, one of the things that I tend to do, and again, this is with all athletes, but again, I preface it with particularly females. And the example I always give is a client of mine called Hannah Cuthbert. So Hannah came to me, I don't know how long ago it was now, 2.5, 3 years ago, and she wanted the prep come almost immediately. She told me some information about herself. She told me some of her history, and I said no, flat out to her face. I said, no, I'm not prepping you. And she was like, taken aback by it. And I said, give me 1.5 years, and then I'll prep you. And it took her a while to understand it. And what I wanted to do was to take her from where she was to where I needed her to be, but use the stepping stones as we got to each place as a means of relaying a lesson that she may have to learn in anticipation for a prep. So body weight goes up massively on a recomp, for example. Right. Okay. Oh my God, my body weight's gone up. Sit down, have that conversation. This is something you're going to experience on a prep. Thank God we're not in that high pressure environment. Learn about this ideal, learn about the perceptions that you're having around it, learn about the feelings that you're having around it. And these will not be as intense when it comes to the actual process of your prep down the line. And lo and behold, every lesson, every stepping stone, every roadblock that we got to, that all carried over to her now being on her third very successful prep with me. Where even when she meets these problems, which still happen, where, she is worried about X, Y, and Z, or body weight does shoot up dramatically. She'll often tell me how she's feeling about it and how she's managing it and how she understands it. When if I was on prep for a pro qualifier for the first time and I didn't learn any of those things, and I was like, oh my God, my weight's gone up 500 grams or 600 grams or whatever, and then you're panicking, and then that relays into everything else. So like having a certain level of patience as both a coach and an athlete, and not looking to get the fruits of your labor too early, that's something that I try and maintain with athletes. And the thing with me is a before and after photo isn't worth a fuck to me if behind it all the athlete had a horrendous experience. It's not worth it for me. And I've always kind of tried to stay steady on that. And it's probably cost me from a perspective of, client acquisition. It's probably cost me from a perspective of, kind of being able to share a portfolio as frequently as I would probably be able to if I didn't give as much of a fuck.
Well, that's as you sort of mentioned, that's the sort of the ideals like that you hold yourself to, and obviously have done for such a long time, which makes you a good coach. But at the same time, I mean, I'm sure some other athlete, if you'd have said no, they went, right, fuck it, I'll just go somewhere else then. And somebody,
but that's something I don't want to work with.
Yeah,
it's not. No, I'm less inclined to do it now. Reason being is that the athletes that I tend to get inquired by are higher level.
Yeah.
And I'll always tell people on a call with them, I was like, if I'm prepping you to win. That kind of way. And if you're not good enough to even have a chance of winning, what's the point of me prepping you? Because you either want to be a bodybuilder and win, or you want to get lean because you're repressing something. If you just want to get lean, do a photo shoot. If that's really what your goal is, and you need to be honest with yourself around that. If your goal is actually to just get lean, and what often happens is because bodybuilding is a sport of extremes, what ends up happening is people will just be like, okay, I know what I'll fucking do. I'll just go to stage. And it's not actually because you want to get up there and win and be a competitor. It's because you want to actually go up there, be lean, and not necessarily take photos, but you want to remove yourself from the version of yourself that you are then. That is absolutely not where if you're moving away from a previous version of yourself rather than trying to get to a better version of yourself, you're already in the wrong space.
That's what I find interesting as well. Obviously, like, initially it was like taking first timers. Now there's a few more experienced competitors coming through. As a lot of them first timers maybe didn't even understand the sport of bodybuilding, which was kind of like became a red flag. Is like never been to a show, don't understand the pose and don't understand the criteria, and at that, or even still saying they want to be a pro in it, which is always fucking.
They just follow 50 or 60 bodybuilders or influencers, and they want to do what they did.
And it's that always leads to a bad outcome, not necessarily on the show, but as you say, there after the show. So it's something that I've had to learn a little bit as a red flag almost when that sort of thing comes up.
Yeah, and the only reason I learned that isn't because I was like, okay, I'm going to hold myself to that straight away. It's because I learned from my fucking mistakes.
Yeah.
Kind of way, like you learn through fucking up. Like you really, really do learn through fucking up, and that's always going to be the way that we develop as professionals is in that aspect of things. It's like owning your fuck ups and owning your mistakes, that kind of way, and learning from them. Because the moment that you push your mistakes aside and you blame the athlete, which happens all the time, all the fucking time, like when you do see athletes, go off plan, binge, have a problem, scalding the fucking athlete is the last thing that they need. You can let them know and be honest that is not going to take them forward. Like this is not productive to the goal that you have. But what do you feel as though it was that led you to make that decision rather than you big fucking fat mess? This is going to destroy your chances of winning, which is what you hear. It's like, what kind of professional do you consider yourself if you're going to scald people like that? And that's a professional, and that's a coach who puts their wants for a result ahead of the experience of the athlete. And that's the moral compass that if you are wagering on, and if you are dealing with, or if you kind of say to yourself that, I care more about the result than the sanctity of my athlete, then you should probably hang your laptop up and, go and do something else, or at least accept the fact that you're not going to be seen as a good person.
Do you see a difference? Could you take somebody that looked, would come for a consultation? Could you look at them and go, right, this person has the ability to be a professional? If that is the goal.
Yeah, man, I think you can look at somebody's physique, and you can look at somebody's physique as genetically gifted, but isn't there yet, and say this guy could go pro. But I also think that you can look at somebody who's not as genetically gifted, and you could say that with time, this person could probably do quite well. And I think that the stepping stones to confirm somebody's long-term goal, if it is to go pro, when they're not as genetically gifted, is going to be predicated on the wins that they take and the achievements that they make along the way. And then as time goes on, the answer to that question will become more realized. But when you have somebody who's just a genetic freak, you can just kind of know that they have the ability to go pro. You know, there's nobody on earth who would have looked at Yemi and said, this guy can't go pro.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of. But then on the same side, if somebody was to see my physique, even now, they'd be like, oh, I don't know. You know, even I say, oh, I don't know. You know, I've got no intentions of doing it. You know, so it's like just using myself as an example because my genetics aren't great. But that doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to work hard enough to be competitive.
And is there, do you think then obviously there's a genetic component to it and there's a drug component to it as well, which is, you always get, you do these podcasts, you always have a huge amount of questions on like PEDs as well.
I honestly feel blessed that people look at me as the person to talk about drugs because one, I'll talk about them openly. And then two, I'd like to think that my basis of information around them allows me to speak about them to some degree confidently. So I'm more than happy to answer questions around drugs.
100%, mate. And that's, you know, another reason. I think you have this grey area where you hear like pros maybe saying you don't need to take that much. And then you get guys like trying to chase it that are obviously on, you know, 2, 3, 4 grams of gear. Like, where is that line with people? Do you know what I mean? Or is there a point either with if somebody's trying to?
So I've spent long enough learning these things and speaking with athletes and looking at athletes, whether I coach them, whether I don't, and looking at the way that drug use is done to understand that there is such a massive spectrum.
Yeah.
But I also don't believe that the moral ceiling that people place on drug use is viable. I think it makes you a bit of an idiot because people are going to do it anyway, right? And at the upper ends of bodybuilding, at pro levels of bodybuilding, at the, like, you know, the Arnolds, the Olympias, the tier 1 pro shows, people use a pretty considerable amount of drugs. And my job isn't to get you there on less. My job is to do my very, very best with the information that I have to get you there with a volume of androgen load that is relative to your, well, I actually have a presentation that I've done previously where, because just like you said, the gray area, right? There's this huge gray area where nobody really knows how much is too much, how much is enough, and how much is like, oh, you're a terrible person for using more drugs. So shut the fuck up, you know, shut up, you know, like, and it does, it pisses me off. It really, really does. Now, previously, I would have been very boxed into my own biases. That would have been biases that I learned from the people who are ahead of me, you know, which were biases that they learned from the people ahead of them. You know, the kind of safer use model was the big one, you know, where it's like low test, high primo or low test, high DHT. It's like, yeah, that has fabulous efficacy and it is, albeit a safer option, but only to a fucking point. You know, to a point you end up like, because what happens is if you look at yourself in any kind of mentality, you box yourself in. You're closing yourself off because you have this bias that comes from nothing. You know, it comes from nothing. And obviously, if your bias and if your morality is, I will only do this with my athletes if I can keep them as safe as possible, that's fine. That's cool. You know, but the more I've been involved in high level bodybuilding, the more I realize that people will do whatever the fuck they can to get there. And I'm always happy to turn the dial up on things if it makes sense. You know, and that's probably where the difference is. Like I guess some people would consider me educated around drug use, but I'm also not ignorant to the fact that higher drugs produce more muscle, you know, that kind of way. Or, you know, if you do certain things that are maybe outside of the moral compass of safety, they produce a certain level of results, you know, and it's like, you know, a lot of those kind of like developments in my own understanding have come from not necessarily education, but experience. So to kind of bring it back to your last question. So like the way that I look at it, right, is you have to look at an athlete on 3 different levels. Right. So let me try to remember these because it's a presentation I've done like a year ago. So the first one is their goal, right? So, or even their experience level, right? So you have first time competitor, seasoned pro. You rate that on a scale of 1 to 10. So somebody who's done 4 or 5 shows, maybe placed decently in an overall, you know, they might be a 6 or a 7. You know, somebody who's got a pro card, they might be a 7 or an 8. A high level pro might be a 10. You know, that kind of thing. Somebody's on their first couple of shows, they might be a 1 or a 2 or a 3. If they're genetically gifted, they might be a 3, that kind of thing. Then you look at the person's actual risk to reward ratio. What are they willing to do? So what are they actually willing to do to get there? Like if you had somebody who's like, you know, I want to maintain my hormonal capacity. I want to be able to, you know, not have to use more than a couple of 100 milligrams a week, that kind of thing. Or you have somebody who's like, I will do whatever the fuck it takes to get myself to be the best bodybuilder in the world. That's a 10. The other one is a 1. And then from there, you have the person's actual ability. You know, their likelihood of being able to get there, the genetic capacity, their quality, you know, that's predicated on things like the dedication they have to the sport, not just their genetics, you know, their ability to adhere, their understanding of the sport, their status as a student of bodybuilding. right? You then rate that on a scale of 1 to 10, right? From there, you get each of those ratings. Now, this is a formula I pulled out of my arse, but it's simply just to try and give people some objective formulation to answer a question that they might have. So let's say we have, for example, right, I'm going to write it down here. Let's say we have a guy who has won, 2 regional overalls, and he's won a handful of classes at a pro qualification level, right? That probably puts him in as a 5 so far as his experience, right? And then let's say he's like, I'm fairly willing to do whatever I need to do here, but I have some limitations on X, Y, and Z. Right? He's a 7. Right? He's about a 7. Right? And then from there, he's pretty genetically gifted. Like he adheres, he lives and eats, sleeps, and breathes bodybuilding, and then that makes him a 9. Right? So from there, then we add those numbers together. Right? So you got 5, 7, and 9. 9 and 7 is 16 plus 5 is 21. Right? Is going to be 21. You then get the average of that, right? So 21 divided by 3, which is whatever it's going to be. So that's going to be, you're getting the average of those 3 numbers, which is, I'll do the maths now in a second. But from there then, right, you start kind of looking at rating somebody's milligram load. So again, we rate that from kind of 1 to 10. Again, this is all predicated on a male for now. You can do the exact same thing for a female, just the actual milligram dosages will go lower. So let's say somebody's like, again, the kind of lowest effective dose of kind of someone's milligram load that you can have as a male, maybe 200 to 300 milligrams. That might be kind of ratings 1 to 2. And then you might have kind of like 400 to 600. That might be kind of 3 to 5. And then you might have kind of 700 to 800, which is probably going to be somewhere closer to 7 to 8. And then as you start to get to the 9s and 10s, you're looking at kind of anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 plus. Because after 1,500 milligrams a week, you kind of start to lose a little bit of traction of exactly what's going on and kind of how things are going. And maybe you can push that to 2 grams, right? But then, like, you just add those numbers together and you get the average of them. So 21 divided by 3 is whatever it's going to be. It's going to be 7. Right? So then from there, you pull that down to 7. And then you know that roughly that person's kind of milligram load in that median range is going to be about 700 to 800 milligrams. And does that have any basis in science or, actual arithmetic? No. But it's a nice way of just gauging roughly where this person should be at in that kind of middle range to upper end quartile of their milligram load.
That's interesting. It's very interesting.
And that's just, I my brain works really weird, mate. Like, it's just, I see everything, even though you can, I try to visualize everything. Like everything.
I think it's very good. I mean, yeah. And then when you look at that, then obviously total milligram load, are you then going, right, well, that's split between, say, DHT derivative or...
Yeah, and then that is where you then... So that might be someone's... Like, that might not be the lowest. That's not going to be what they cruise on. Yeah. But it's also not going to be their absolute max dosages. It might be where they're kind of at that median level. Like, you can kind of decide then based off where that actually lies on the spectrum. Because again, you start to lose the ability to have any kind of traction and objectivity from that point onwards. But you know that in that kind of upper quartile, you're going to be looking at about 700 to 800 milligrams a week. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be then split up in whatever way that you then so manage. And again, other people might look at that and go, okay, that's somebody's baseline test dose. Whatever way they want to look at it. Again, I've got no qualms towards that, but it just gives people a little bit of objectivity to try and manage the kind of the guesswork that comes about with where can I morally place this person without seeming like I'm doing too much.
No, I think that's fantastic. Like, I think that's something that do you have that as a model that you share in your, can you buy that, or where can you look at yours?
So I done a seminar not too long ago in Amsterdam, which was fucking cool as shit. And I wanted to try and give people an insight into just bodybuilding drugs as a whole. The morality of them, the efficaciousness of them, the action of them based off what they are, the DHT, the test pay, everything. And that formula I came up with while I was sleeping. I woke up, I was like, I have an idea. And I woke up and I wrote it down. And it went off really, really well. So like, I do. It might sound like a fucking bit of a plug here. I'll probably plug my coaching at the end. I do provide consultation, for anything and anyone on any subject that like is deemably appropriate for me to speak on. If it's not my expertise, then I'm not going to speak on it. PEDs are a pretty big one that people come to me with questions on, but I'm quite happy to own that, that kind of way. And I've done a lot of work on just like, prophylactic measures. So things like, your safety measures that you take, the thyroid physiology and thyroid drug application, female physiology, PEDs for females, applications there. But I think the difference between me maybe and other educators, and first of all, I'm not the smartest educator in the world, and I'll never put myself on that. I've learned from some of the smartest people in the world: Dean, John, Cal, Joe Jeffrey, Victor Black, despite the fact that he hates me now. You know, all these different guys, and I've from there found my own means of managing the conversations around drugs. So like there is consultation availability if people ever want to speak to me. So please don't hesitate, even yourself, you know, like just let me know if you want to have a conversation about anything at all. And I guess, like I said, the one thing that's maybe a little bit different with me is that I don't box myself into any kind of bias. Like I'm not a high test or a low test, high primo guy. I'm also not a high test, low DHT guy. You know, I'm a look at the individual for where they want to go and what they want to do and what they have in play, and, you know, do what's necessary to get them there within the means of education and understanding the limited amount of safety I may or may not be able to put on that person's physiology while they do it.
I think that's interesting about you as well, because the knowledge, but also the application, be able to see and take the morality, whatever we call it, aspect to it as well, you know, in relation to the goal. Because I know for so long there was this safer use model, and it's something I tried to follow, and I was like, shit, that could be bigger if it just used a bit more.
Yeah, that is the reality of it, you know. It is, because you can only really do the kind of low test, high primo, high DHT thing for so long until you just have high test and higher primo.
Yeah.
Eventually it's just high both, you know. Yeah. And the way I look at it, when we understand the fact that like a lot of that comes from the elimination of AIs, right? And this is where I believe that like I remember this was the main argument that I heard that kind of got my little framework of bias and just went, and just blew away. Where AIs, for example, right, one of the main things that they're kind of like, you know, pointed at as like the enemy is dyslipidemia, which is shifts in your LDL, HDL, and general cholesterol, right? So the answer to that, so far as that limitation, is to use a lower baseline test and a higher baseline DHT in order to moderate your androgen to estrogen ratio. One of the things that also causes dyslipidemia is high androgens. Right? So you're saying to yourself, okay, the high androgens that I get from this thing, the dyslipidemia I get from this thing, and the dyslipidemia I get from this thing, this one's better. Right. And I just don't agree with that, because I've been faced with situations previously over the last kind of year or two where I knew somebody was getting estrogen-based side effects. I knew it. And I just said, use more Mastron. And what you're doing there when you decide to use more Mastron as the answer to that kind of dilemma is you're hoping in the off chance that a secondary impact and a secondary effect and a secondary, what would you call it? A secondary, whatever, action of that compound works. Yeah. The guy was 2 weeks out from a show and it didn't.
Yeah.
And I could have put in a low dose of Nolvadex or a well-monitored dose of Arimidex at not an extreme level, because when it comes to the use of AIs, again, we're kind of going off topic here. We're not trying to eliminate estrogen. We're trying to manage it, you know? And it's like people have found themselves boxed into the ideals of other people, you know, and that's where I believe that people go wrong, because what happens is people then become like, again, I'm trying to avoid being anyway insulting to anyone. Like, it's like people then become almost boxed into, you know, not being sheep, because that sounds like a really shitty way to refer to people as, but they box themselves into the ideals of the people they look up to.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know? Yeah. And you kind of have to be able to break the mold a little bit. And the best way to break the mold is going to be when you're presented with the fucking mold being crumbled up in front of you and thrown at your face, you know? And that's what happened to me. And over the course of the last couple of kind of like year or two, I suppose is probably the main period of time, maybe even 2.5 years, I just decided that I'm going to be the one to learn this information, you know, and I'm going to listen to the individuals who have the information, but I'm not going to take it as gospel. I'm going to go and use that information that I've learned, because again, one of the hardest things for people to understand about learning this information is where to find it. You know, again, go to the individuals who have done that groundwork and appreciate them for what they've done. People like John, people like Joe, people like Victor, people like Dean. You know, go to them, pay for their time. And I guess some people pay for my time now, which is fucking cool. You know, it's cool that people want to learn from me. You know, go to these seminars, but also allow that to be, you know, umbrellaed with the idea that you're trying to develop your own approach and your own understanding. And the moment I did that was the moment I started getting better results. People started getting overalls. People started winning shows. You know, I started getting people placing in pro shows, you know, because I allowed my decision-making process to be governed by my brain. And
you're picking bits and learning from different people, and then
yeah, Yeah, and like you'll see it all the time. Like even a lot of the people who would have had these biases, that they've broken away from them as well. But because the period of time where they were highly educating, or like their educating was the predominant thing that they were doing, people are still grabbing onto the information that these people shared back then. The biggest sign of a coach and a professional is the ability to change your mind or develop your mind. The kind of way, because at the end of the day, there's only one real thing that you're trying to do as a bodybuilding coach, and that's become a better decision maker. That's really all you're trying to do as a bodybuilding coach, is to become the best decision maker that you possibly can, because you need to be able to make decisions all the time. And if your ability to make decisions is being limited on the ability of decisions that are being made for you from somebody else, then you're limiting your ability to be a good bodybuilding coach. You might find that when you make those decisions yourself that you're wrong, but that's fucking fine. That's cool. That's cool. Then you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to put that to bed. That kind of way. There's loads of things that I've done previously where I was like, I probably shouldn't have done that. And I kind of abandoned that idea. I learned more about why I thought it worked. And then I learned a little bit more about why I probably didn't. But I don't push everything aside as that's wrong. It was just the wrong environment for that to work.
Yeah. It's the context in which it's applied a lot of the time. Rather than
every athlete is an N equals one.
Yeah.
They're all N equals ones.
No, I think that's very interesting. Like, it's definitely something I think a lot of people, I think a lot of they have a baseline knowledge of it, but when you start to go into that higher level, then it does break things down a lot more. Like, I think particularly like the AIs and the SARMs as well, surrounding kind of estrogen management. I know from like my like personal experience of use as well, is like for so long it was safer use model, and then couldn't certain experience like estrogenic side effects. And every time estrogenic side effects, rather than using like tamoxifen or something, it was pushing up masteron, which again is still having that impact on HDL, LDL, rather than maybe being able to actually get more out of it. In terms of my goal is to be a better bodybuilder, and
exactly.
something like tamoxifen.
Yeah, it's just like for some reason we place certain drugs in a cell. I'll be like, oh, they're terrible. It's true, man. Like diuretics are the same. Diuretics are the same, and by the only rule with drug use, right, is if you don't understand it or you don't have access to somebody who does understand it, do not fucking go near it.
Yeah,
that is the only rule. That I believe is the only rule. Is that if you don't understand the potential impacts of what you're about to do or the potential negatives of what you're about to do, you have no right to do it. And if you don't understand it, you need to go and look for somebody who does. That's the only real moral qualm that you should have.
Yeah, no,
and then being honest with your athletes. Like, don't pretend to your athletes that you're doing something simple when you're not.
No, mate, I appreciate a lot of your time here. I know we've taken up a lot of it there, so I'm not going to let it go on too long, but I think you're the sort of guy you could go on and talk all day.
Look, man, I just want to give as much value as I can for the time that I have, and just pay my respects to you and what you're doing for Irish bodybuilding. I'm not at home anymore, so there's only so much I can do to deliver information to people back home.
Well, look, down in terms of, because I lived in England there for around 8 years, and I did feel it, the whole, definitely the scene, your ability to be educated, the amount of shows, it sort of brought me on a lot as a coach. Like, do you see a big difference over in not the mainland, but England, compared to being back here in Ireland? Mainland. I know, sounds like a fucking pirate.
I do know.
You call it.
Look, bodybuilding is just a bigger scene up here, particularly in the north. Like, I live in Manchester. Like, you have Rotherham, which is a massive bodybuilding hub. You have like a lot of areas around the kind of Midlands. Like Birmingham, a little bit less down south. There's a bit less bodybuilding down there. But if you're looking at the Midlands, like Birmingham would be a big hub for bodybuilding. Manchester I found to be like unbelievably beneficial for my career because I
training in there.
Yeah, well, man, FLF is the coolest fucking. Big up Chach, big up James, the guys who run FLF. They have given me so many opportunities to do my job in that gym and bring people in, check them in, film content. I held a seminar there alongside Luke and Cal. Luke being No Switch Fitness, who people probably know of, who's a very, very good friend of mine. And, I needed Manchester to be something for me. And it's been that, alongside the lads, Oscar Young. Anyone who knows me or follows me right now will know how much I love Oscar Young, who's a young 4040 on Instagram. He is one of the greatest people you'll ever meet in your entire life, and is, without a doubt, alongside Cal, the biggest benefactor to the development of my career in the last couple of years. But like, the scene over here is fabulous. Like, the best bodybuilders within the UK and Ireland, they're here.
Yeah.
That they're here, and that's just the reality of it. And the scene is bigger here. The availability to be part of bodybuilding, the availability to be seen is here. And that's what I needed to be, was to be seen. You know, so what I've needed the UK to be for me, even though I'm a very proud Irishman, and I'll never ever forget that, and I'll never lose that. And I make sure that everyone knows where I'm from and knows where I came from and knows what, you know, what scene I'm part of and where it all came across. I definitely say that it has been, you know, massive.
You know, it's something I would I've come back a year ago here and realized like, okay, this is actually much further behind than I originally thought it was from being away in England.
That's the word. That's the word.
Yeah.
We're 10 years behind back home.
I said exactly the same thing to come back, and it's then how to go about maybe bringing that forward. I think like having definitely
Quality of coaches.
yeah, the seminars. I think there's very little, if any. I've seen, like I've been over a year now, and I've seen nothing, you know, of any sort of warrant to be put on here. And it
Well,
does.
hold that thought. Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say to you, is there anything coming from your end?
I haven't planned anything directly, but based off the reception of the show, based off the reception of the gas meetup that we did that weekend as well, I'm definitely thinking about running something, even if it is just me. Running something in Southside, in Sandyford, which is a very accessible gym in the south part of Dublin. You know, and trying to do something for a day or two, you know, and just opening people that opportunity. But like that opportunity is going to be presented to people, but people need to act on it.
Yeah.
That's the thing, you know, and there's an unfortunate process and there's an unfortunate aspect of some of the bodybuilding back home where the kind of rulers of the roost are old school. And that's fucking cool. I don't disrespect them. I don't think they're any lesser. I still look up to the lads, you know, people like Brian Hickey, people like Tommy Staunton, people like Larry back in the day, Brian Ward, you know, like these are lads who are, you know, absolutely killing it back home, you know. So it's like, you know, who am I to take them away? Because at the end of the day, right, this is where I believe the limitation on the development of coaches back home comes from, and I guess the limitation on the development of coaches as a whole comes from that there's only actually one thing that truly matters in bodybuilding, and that's winning.
Yeah.
You know, and if people are winning, people are happy. You know, and that's fine because I'll never take anything away from somebody who wins. Like the best coaches in the world aren't necessarily the most educated coaches in the world. Hani Rambod, like he's not necessarily the most educated guy in the world. He's developed his own orientation around what he deems to be appropriate. And now he has fucking the classic Olympia, Mr. Olympia. It's like, you know, who is anyone to take away anything from anyone else? But I think that's the issue, is that the attitude from people back home and the attitude from people in general is that I'm separate from you because we think different. You know, I don't consider myself any better than anyone back home. And I'd like to think that nobody back home will consider myself any better than them. Like you got Alan Kelly as well. Like he's continuing to kind of deliver great results all the time as well. So it's like, you know, everyone seems to kind of have this ideology of separatism, you know, and I just don't believe that that's the way forward. Like, you know, if let's say if one of the lads back home held a seminar, the older school lads, I'd go to it.
Isn't it? Like actual education gives people a chance to get into the coaching, to grow the scene, right? It's very easy to be close-minded and say, no, this is the way it is, but that's the way it is. You know, I know when I started this podcast, it's like, well, who are you to do this podcast? Well, I'm the one doing it. And that's the difference.
Like that was the same thing, man. Like back when I started and I started posting content, like there was like, who are you to talk about this? You know, you've not got results, you've not got no muscle. But like at the end of the day, what I'd say to those people now is like, look at me now.
That's the plan.
And I was never like, you'll see. Because I never actually gave a fuck, and I still don't give a fuck what people think of me. I don't. I like the fact that I feel as though there's a certain level of respect that I have based off the show, which is fabulous, you know, because that really was a confirmation for me that it makes people appreciate what I've done. But like, you know, the unfortunate circumstance is that a lot of people back home are boxed into the small pond.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the limiter on Irish bodybuilding. You know, that really is the limiter, and nobody needs to necessarily change. You know, like, you know, I'm not sitting there telling all the lads to go and hit the books, you know, and to, you know, go and start fucking speaking about things like this. That's not what I'm saying. Don't change the way that you deliver results, which are fabulous, fabulous results. You know, like I said, utmost respect to these guys, and I still look up to them. Do you know what I mean? Like I said, I'm not egotistical enough to consider myself above anyone. I never will. But I do not believe that the idea of considering somebody different to you to the point that you push them out is right. And that's why I left. That's one of the reasons why I left, because, you know, you're just getting shit all the time. You know, and for what? For trying to be a better professional, for trying to be a better coach, for taking a different trajectory that's not just like, you know, fucking, you know, do 70 reps and hope for the best, you know, and it's like, that's just not really going to fly.
Like, I think if you're true to what you stand by, you fully believe in it, you know, it's only going to be a good thing. I think I'm hoping, you know, I think with that show over here, hopefully you bring a wee seminar or two over. we'll
Yeah, I
keep
might
it.
have, based off what seems to be interest on your side, man. I might have to think about that.
Oh, absolutely. Like as well, you know, you let me know. I'm sort of quite close with a lot of the gyms here now as well, and it's something that I'd love to get involved in at some point as well with it. But I really want to see Northern Ireland and Ireland in general, rather than 10 years behind, like at least catching up on
Yeah,
what it was across the water. But
yeah.
Ross,
We'll have a chat, man. We'll have a chat.
I thank you very much for coming on. Where can people find you if you're anything there you want to plug? Where?
I'm not going to try and plug too much because what I'll say to people before I plug myself is that you and Nikki are doing a great job. And whatever success has come in your way, which seems to be enough, you've earned it and you deserve it. And I hope that people back home are looking at you guys as valuable members of the coaching community and as the athletes, because you're fabulous, fabulous people who didn't need to do what you did for me that weekend, between collecting me, between just being there to greet people and to make sure that everything was being taken photos of, and just making sure that everything was sorted. So before I do anything to do it myself, a massive thank you to you and a massive thank you to Nikki.
Appreciate that.
And the very best of luck to Nikki now as she kind of finishes up and kind of moves towards the latter end of her prep. She looks fabulous. And then so far as me, Instagram is the best place to find me. At Ross_team pro coach is where you'll find me. I'm always open to a conversation in the DMs for any kind of questions at any point in time. I do have coaching availability for both prep and off season at the moment. They are relatively limited, but there is, enough spaces there for people if they want to have a conversation with me. And, at the same time, I'd also love to be working with more people back home. Because I do feel as though that the majority of my client base is international or from the UK. I have a handful of guys back home, but I'd love to have a couple of more faces on the team that sound a bit more like me. But that's really it, man. And obviously the Pro Coach YouTube is also where you'll find plenty of content of me. In fact, the YouTube video from the Ireland show was literally launched there about an hour ago. So that's available to watch now on YouTube for your viewing pleasure. It's about an hour long, but it's sick and it was enjoyable. And I'd like to think that the things that I spoke about earlier on about the show are pretty well encapsulated in the video. But honestly, mate, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. So yes, go check Ross out. Hopefully at some point, again, we'll have him on, but certainly I hope he gets a seminar over here as well. So guys, check out the YouTube channel, Neil Rennie Coaching, for any sort of coaching inquiries as well. But please share the podcast as well. We're trying to get the bodybuilding scene to grow here, like we talked a lot about. So it's all about people getting behind it and sharing it. But thanks, guys. Tune in next week.